What's up, guys? Welcome back to the shop. In today's video, I'm going to be making a knife out of wrought iron. This is the first time I work with wrought iron. I'm going to be starting with a billet that I end up cutting in half, and it's 1 1/4 by about 6 inches. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up my tongs to actually fit it, because I do not have tongs that fit this size. And I'm just going to do some light adjustments, that way I can hold this material while I work it. If my voice sounds a little off, is because I've been sick the past week, so bear with me. Hopefully I get better in the next week or so, and we'll get back to our regular schedule. Here, what I have in my hand is a block of 52-100 that I had made in a previous video. I'll be forging that down along with this wrought iron bar and getting it all to the same size and dimensions so that I can stack and do a sand construction for my hunting knife. When working with wrought iron, it's very important to keep it forge welding hot, or else it'll split apart from the pressure. That's why I'm working the material so hot and just going back and forth, getting everything the same thickness and width so I can clean up and stack it. It has been interesting working with wrought iron because it's such a delicate material, but I have my pieces here. The center is 52-100 and the outside cladding is wrought iron. One of the methods I like to use to ensure a clean weld is dipping my billet into some kind of hydrocarbon. In this case, it's kerosene, and once it burns off, it leaves a thin layer, so that helps keep the billet clean and it helps it forge weld together properly. As you can see, I forge welded it first with the hammer, just to make sure I got a nice good forge weld before I took it to the press and worked it more aggressively. Here, all I'm trying to do is draw it out as evenly as possible and not to get too aggressive with it. I don't really want to use the drawing dies yet. I just want to slowly work it out. Now that I'm sure that I got a nice solid forge weld, I'm gonna take these less aggressive drawing dies and just slowly draw it out bit by bit so I can get enough length for my billet. I'll alternate back and forth between the drawing dies and the flattening dies. That way I get a nice consistent thickness all throughout. I'm aiming for about an 1/8 thickness overall. Now that I've reached my thickness, I'm just straightening out the billet and getting it cleaned up. This is the first time I work with wrought iron. I've heard that the best way to forge it out to get the best reveal is to forge in the tip. That way you can see the grain that runs through it run towards the tip. So I'm doing that here. I've also heard of people that they cut in the tip, almost like when they make a katana and you cut the tip in and then roll over the edge. That's one method of doing it, which honestly is the preferred method, I believe, but I don't know where I left my hot cut tool. So this is the only way I can do it right now without having to stop, let the steel cool, and cutting it with the grinder. As I'm forging it, since this is wrought iron, it kind of wants to peel or crack open because of the fibers that are in it. So I didn't want to forge it too aggressively. And here I'm putting my template on top to make sure I have the right curve and enough steel. That way I have enough material to profile my knife out with. Ideally, I would have cut this piece out on that bandsaw, but the blade was extremely dull and it just was not cutting through, and I didn't feel like taking the time to change it out. Regardless, this 24 grit ceramic belt does quick work of the steel. These belts that I'm using are red label abrasives, but if any company wants to sponsor me, I would gladly use their belts, so let me know. Now that I'm done profiling, I'm just getting some of that rough scale off the tang so I can drill my holes. For this particular build, I decided to do 6 1/8 inch pins. They will be hidden pins, so you won't be seeing them, as well as a whole bunch of 3/16 holes. That way the epoxy can grab onto both pieces of the handle and give it a stronger hold over time. Here I'm just doing a standard oil quench to get the knife hardened and ready for temper. This is the knife straight out of temper. On this knife I decided not to grind any of my initial bevels, and I just went straight into the quench. Because this is wrought iron, the steel is actually rather soft on the cladding. So to help keep it from warping or doing any crazy stuff, I decided to go with that method. And here I'm just gonna pour some muriatic acid and just leave it for about half an hour to an hour. That way it softens up the scale and I can get it off with a wire wheel or a grinding wheel. One thing to take note, if you've never used muriatic acid for this method, I would recommend definitely having some baking soda diluted with water. That way you can neutralize it as soon as you get out of the muriatic acid. And here I'm just grinding in my bevels, periodically checking it to make sure that I'm having core steel exposed. And it's very soft material, so this actually goes pretty quick. Here you can see the core steel already starting to pop out in certain spots. And we hand sand. Lots of hand sanding. For my handle material, I'm using these composite scales that I stole from my brother, and I'm going to be lining it with this black linen micarta. What I'm doing here serves two different purposes. One, it's giving me a nice flat surface to glue up, and two, I'm scuffing up the mating surfaces to ensure a nice, good, solid glue up. And I'll epoxy it together. Here I'm mixing some 5-minute epoxy with just a tint of black pigment to hide any imperfections in the bond. And don't forget to add some extra weight on top. That way you get rid of all that extra epoxy and you don't have a big old epoxy line in between your two layers. Yes, I have still yet to fix my bandsaw, so it still wobbles a lot. Here I have my knife already outlined on my piece of handle material, and I'm just gonna cut close to the line that I have scribed, but not quite there. That way I have a little bit of meat that I can clean up afterwards on the grinder. And here I'm grinding all the profile right up against that scribed line I have. And I'll leave just a tiny bit so the glue can set in there. And I'll grind it all flat after the handle is glued on. If you saw the video where I did the serpentine knife, I also did that in a hidden tank construction, but I used 3/16 pins instead, and now I'm gonna do it with 6 1/8 pins. That way I have a better bond in between and it doesn't really wiggle as much. And instead of getting everything ready prior, I'm actually going to glue everything up and then grind it all the way down flat, and then I'll etch it with the handle on, and I'll do something interesting there to keep the acid from touching it. Here I'm doing very tiny divots in my handle scale. That way I can have some epoxy get into the handle scale as well as in between the handle. That way I have a better bond between all three components, the two handle scales and the knife handle. It's a little bit of extra work, but it ensures a better fit and a better bond. In all honesty, if you have never done hidden pin construction like this, the most tedious part is getting those pins in there. And especially if you're working like I am with 5-minute epoxy, you're kind of on a time limit, so you have to work fast. But I mean, that's what makes it fun. What's the fun in taking my time? I'd rather be on a time limit and be fearing that this glue is gonna set up before I get a chance to put it on, which actually has never happened to me. So there's that. And here I'm just slowly working it back up to the steel. When you see those little sparks fly, that's because I'm hitting steel. And I'm using an 80 grits aluminum oxide belt, which does quick work of the wood, but doesn't really get into the steel too much, so it gives me a better finish. When I'm working on a hidden tang knife, I usually take my time and scribe out lines to get everything nice and uniform, but whenever I make a knife with handle scales that are the same size, I just kind of wing it and eyeball it. I already have a feel of what I want, so I just slowly work it in, and I go check it slowly, make sure that the sides are even as I'm contouring the knife and getting everything to the rough shape before I go in and start doing more hand work. One thing I don't always see is knife makers using woodworking tools to be able to work these handles down. Here I'm just blending in all of my odd corners and whatnot because I like a nice blended in handle. It does quick work of what I need and it preps it for my hand sanding. Here I have a little bit of ferric chloride that I use for etching my knives, and I'm putting in some scraps of handle material. That way I can see if it does any discoloration or it absorbs any of the liquid into it. It shouldn't, but that's what I'm checking. And at first glance, it doesn't look like it did anything. Maybe on the actual wood of the handle material, it looks like it absorbed a tiny bit, but not really. But I'm gonna play it safe regardless. I took some clear nail polish and I put it all around the seam. I left the micarta exposed and I use that as my buffer area. The micarta doesn't absorb any of the actual ferric chloride, so it should be good to go theoretically. Hopefully it works out. On a side note, for any women that are watching, if there's any, nail polish is a bitch to work with. I don't know how you guys do it. The little applicator brush is a pain to work with and it sucks, so kudos to you for working with that. Also, this is the part where I ask you guys to like, comment, and subscribe. That way the channel can grow and I can bring you better videos and actually tool up better, because the bigger the channel, the more the views, the more I get paid, the better tools and materials I can use. One day I want to be able to make Dennis Tyrell money and be able to inlay all my knives with gold, but I can't do that without your guys' help. So please like, comment, and subscribe. By the way, the knife is nice and sharp, and I am essentially done. This knife is actually not for sale. It is for my brother's birthday / Christmas gift, and that's why I stole his handle scales. The resin in the handle, that blue color with the wood and then that aluminum mesh that's in there, it works very well and it gives a very beautiful design in the handle, as well as all the beautiful movement that wrought iron gives into the blade. It gives it a lot of movement and character, and it kind of looks like a desert, kind of like just wavy pattern. I don't know, it looks really cool. I definitely recommend checking it out in person. It's a very beautiful look. But as always, guys, thank you very much for watching. I greatly appreciate y'all, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.